So we're back with our fourth episode of the Utility Strategy Podcast, the first infrastructure podcast to shine a light on what we love to call utility strategy. As we all know, buried utilities, they pose an enormous risk to any infrastructure projects, often causing schedule overruns, unexpected costs, and of course, utility strikes. But with the right utility strategy, we're able to mitigate that risk and streamline our projects, and that's what our podcast is all about. So sharing and gaining all kinds of insights that will enable just that, helping project managers, utility coordinators, estimators, mappers, planners, designers, engineers, and any other stakeholder overcome the challenges of buried utilities in our right of way, also from a micro perspective and a macro perspective. And to help us do just that, we have here with us today David Rottmayer, who's going to bring forward the telecom perspective and talk to us about what's happening in the space. David has gained incredible experience in the telecommunication industry for the past 43 years, during which he has designed, built, and operated wireline and wireless networks. He is a recognized trainer, expert, and leader in the fiber to the X to whatever, and design and deployment. And he's been leading complex projects in the space since the very beginning. So, David, without further ado, welcome to our podcast. And how are you today? Give us some background about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm fine, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion.
Sure, great to have you on.
Yep. A little bit of background about myself is, I started off back in 1978 in the telecom industry, back before there was fiber highly deployed, before there was a lot of things, I remember whenever T1s or E1s in the European community, were the bread and butter for all communications backhaul. Obviously, today that doesn't work.
You were back.
We grew
like the Quest LD1 era.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
I haven't heard that in a long time. The LD1s and the LD4s and the long haul. Anyways, it's keep on going. It brings back some memories of those air encasements and those splices on the side of the road.
Oh yeah. But what was funny was that we brought in fiber to start doing inter-office connectivity and things of this nature, and we said solution everything, and then in the mid '90s, cellular service became the bread and butter. It became great. It was there. We no longer needed the long haul landline type service. We was going to backhaul everything with a wire, with microwave and everything. But that was the T1s and T3 services and things of this nature. And then the cellular business grew and grew and grew, and all of a sudden there was more need for backhaul than what microwave could really support properly. And today's with the 5G and everything of this nature, even the 3G and the LTE services, backhaul is necessary for much larger bandwidth. And but what's funny was that whenever we went that route, we first of all said we didn't need, whenever we had the fiber for in office, we didn't need RF engineers anymore, so those became obsolete. Then the wireless industry came, and we no longer needed outside plant engineers, so they became obsolete. And we're back now to where we need both. And so it's a fun industry to be in because we go up and down, and it'll be one of those days whenever we all will sit back and sit and say, "Wow, what happened over those 40 years?"
David, tell us a bit about what's happening in the industry today. What's happening at the moment?
Sure. Well, there's two major initiatives going on, really. There's the wireless with 5G deployment concepts, but it's really all driven down to one basic fundamental: the broadband services. What the users need as far as services and everything, and how they're using said services. Before, we had television over the air broadcast, and you put your rabbit ears up or your TV antennas up and got it off the air. Well, streaming services, that doesn't work anymore. So that is one of the big things. And of course, back, in the 70s and 80s, we talked about the killer app, what was going to kill ISDN.
Yeah.
um, but really, over time, it's progressed, and the killer app isn't a specific thing anymore. It's really the user and how much they want of the services we can now enable. And so the industry is, and that's what's driven the broadband services on fiber and fiber to the home and fiber to the curb and fiber, because no longer is it just the supercomputers and the IBM mainframes that need to communicate. Now we have, servers that are the size of, your desktop, what it used to be, and they are now chunking out more than the old IBM mainframes used to. So it's now connectivity, and that creates the distributed environment. That distributed environment then required higher bandwidth at smaller
David,
locations.
it's really funny you say
No
that.
longer
It's really funny you say that because right through and through, throughout all the years, I've seen a reciprocal or a circle going back and forth. So, for example, in 2003, do you remember the fiber crisis, the glass glut, where all of a sudden there was too much glass in the ground, right through and through, and people didn't know what to do with it. And then all of a sudden we get back to here, it goes back up and down, where everyone was putting glass in, and then all of a sudden there was too much on the ground, and now we have that shortage because of COVID and because of the pandemic and the fact that everyone can now work from home. So it was really incredible how now there's not enough glass in the ground, and everywhere you go, we're trying to get that glass back in the ground. Do you see it that we're going to have another glut again or another surplus of glass in the ground?
I don't really think that's going to happen. The glut that happened back in the early 2000s was because where we built our
Mm.
fiber at. Again, we was focused in on backhaul and interconnectivity as opposed to connectivity. Connectivity is to the end user. Interconnectivity is getting the ability to provide said services. So we built a lot of fiber, put a lot of large count fiber in the ground. Williams did it with the pipelines. Quest did it. Wiltel. All these companies did it, and put a lot of large count fiber to interconnect things, but never focused in on connectivity. Because, in fact, why should we? Back then, we had, our broadband service mandate was pretty low and pretty minuscule, and no one ever thought that people would really be demanding that. We should have learned our lesson, but we didn't. We had ISDN with 64 bonded and things of this nature, and we thought that was good. Then we had ATM, and we thought that was good. And what we always underestimate is our end user. The end user is the person that, quite truthfully, will always use more but want to pay less for it. And that's our biggest challenge. Is how do we build these things, and how do we maintain these things in a cost-efficient manner without increasing our operating costs, but rather decreasing it? And technology has done, come a long ways. If you think about it, back in the 70s and 80s, we had a lot of people who had to do a lot of different things because everything was so manual. We've automated things. Underground utility mapping, things of this nature, just was kind of unheard of, especially sharing of information. No one shared the underground information. So all of a sudden you had strikes and things of this nature and all. So it was really one of those interesting, challenging environments. Today, with the end users, they want more, don't want to pay as much, but still yet we have to do it. So we have to figure out how to be efficient, much more efficient and everything, and use technology properly. Another problem we had back in the early days was we put technology out for the sake of technology, not for the sake of the customer, because we didn't really look at the customer because everything was regulated. The mindset was they have to use us.
Yeah.
So shoot, let's just spend money because, in fact, the government will allow us to.
Yeah, and
So,
it's such an incredible world. Is that me on my end, David, or is that?
I think it might be on David's end because I hear myself as well, like
That's interesting.
from
There we
David.
go. We have our telecom. We are intercommunicating.
Yeah, but we'll fine. We'll edit it out. I'm not too fussy
Now,
about it.
I really,
So David,
sorry,
what
sorry, one second. I really liked where you're going with the interconnectivity and the fact that everything was so regulated. It was a monopoly. What do you say when they broke up those monopolies, and now all of a sudden you had actually it's still a monopoly per se? It's a you have those 5 6 big companies that own the entire backbone, and now you have all these smaller companies, all these black fiber companies coming up and popping up, local fiber companies, even municipalities because of the fact that they need connectivity are building their own fiber networks. Do you see that as the new or the next best thing, that all these local smaller municipalities and smaller areas are building their own fiber networks because they want to be connected in?
right. I kind of equate that back to whenever, when the industry started and you had the AT&T. AT&T was everybody, and then there was GTE. So then there was still unserved pockets, so that became the rural X. So if you look at it, the municipalities are starting to become the rural X model, you know, because they are isolated to a certain regional aspect that they can do. I mean, co-ops have a little bit more flexibility because, in fact, they can then build their region and then go select outward. Municipalities are very limited in where they are allowed to build, and because it's tax
Right.
base. That's the key thing. So why would why would a city build out to the country whenever it's outside those city limits and their tax base is not there because that's county tax base. So it becomes an interesting challenge in where you're creating a lot of pockets with the community. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the community network is great, but it needs to be almost like what they've done over in Nevada or Utah, rather, with Utopia, where they've built, there are different communities have built and paid for it, but it's run by a more larger umbrella organization. Now, granted, Utopia is now Google, but that's another story and everything. But other areas have done the same thing, that where the communities have built their isolated environment, but then have been allowed to expand somewhat on those points. So it's going to be an interesting model. What it's doing is driving some interesting investments. You know, I know that to be able to build the rural marketplace, we have to absolutely have government funding because of the cost of building things and to support it. But the government doesn't have a clue about how to provide money to the rural marketplace because inherently they're dealing with tax dollars, so they're trying to make certain rule sets so they don't get scammed. That hasn't always been very good. Let's just look at RDOF and how badly it was scammed, and some other, Reconnects and what was the other one, CAF. It all got scammed and everything. But in theory, it was about because they wanted to make sure big companies were doing it. Well, those big companies went built into their lower served tier 2 cities, but not the tier 3 and rural marketplace. And still today, the rural marketplace is poorly served because the government doesn't know how to allocate funds to companies that will actually deliver.
Interesting.
And that is one of the challenges.
So here I actually have a very interesting thing that the Department of Agriculture, the USDA, is actually building its own broadband system. That's big government building right through and through to all the agricultural areas. Is that also a trend right now?
Well, USDA is, it is, who owns the rural telephone and rural electrification and things of this nature. So it's all part of their umbrella. Now then, as far as they're building their own quote unquote network, they are following the same model as the old FTS 2000 was, where they're actually leasing services through the different companies, but they're requiring the big company to be the company that provides it, and they're subleasing down to the smaller LEC companies and things of this nature, which is problematic for them because that one of the ways that the smaller LEC companies get money is through lease services, and whenever you're a sub tier of a sub tier of a sub tier, you don't really make too much cash off of that. And all you really get counted is, if you're part of NECA or something of this nature, is access line counts, things of this nature, and then you got a fixed tariff rate. But that fixed tariff rate doesn't really help you if it's subtended.
Now, with the existing markets, I've seen a unification per se of all these bigger firms buying other bigger firms, and it's really been the merger and acquisition model of, instead of building your own network, you just buy someone in place who actually has a network. And the second part of that question, the discussion, which I really want to talk about, is how quickly the technology is turning. So, for example, a few years ago, I kept on hearing about DAS, distributed antenna systems, and now it's really coming into effect for 5G, especially in downtowns where we're all of a sudden seeing multiple antennas go up every couple of blocks or every couple of poles. It's really incredible how much infrastructure we're building for this one. Like, we're really betting on this one system to be that go-to system, and what happens next. So it's really, really interesting. Number one, the mergers, and then how do you actually develop a system which will not be too, per se, ugly, or aesthetically pleasing for the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, on the merger side of the house, there was always writing on the wall that was going to happen. I mean, the divestiture of AT&T and do the five major LECs and things of this nature wasn't never going to hold. And I mean, it was as soon as Clinton and parties were out of the office that Pacific Bell started buying up other parts of it and became basically now AT&T again and everything. And then, of course, Verizon was originally, the North New England and GTE, and so they just basically merged and everything and became that. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the marketplace because of cost. Cost is one of those things that drives it, and so everyone wants to steal the big markets. The only way to steal the big market is to buy up the existing companies. The smaller companies, but now there are some companies that are buying, the rural marketplace. Frontier is an example. Frontier did a really bad deal, and they bought up too much and went bankrupt because of it, because they didn't understand that Verizon did a poor job of FiOS in their areas, and some of the GTE properties they bought were so substandard that they didn't have the cash to put into building it up and things of this nature. Same thing with Windstream. Why Windstream went into bankruptcy? They bought a lot of bad GTE properties. GTE, like I said, was the second carrier per se, but it was designed for the rural marketplace, and they just threw out a lot of copper and a lot of copper that has degraded over the years. And these companies bought it up thinking footprint because they looked at it from an access line and subscriber potential basis as opposed to plant basis. And that was how the old costing model for buying companies were, based upon access lines and everything. Not a good model. Never really thought about revenue. And even back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when we was putting all that fiber in the ground, all these companies was just looking at, let's get it in the ground and we'll make money later. So a lot of them, that's why a lot of them got bought up, because they overspent without revenue models. I mean, back in the CLEC heyday, the late 90s, everybody was doing business plans on the back of a napkin to get millions of dollars. Craziness and everything. And as a result of that, you had non-telecom people trying to build networks. Back to that very issue of this topic is, the underground infrastructure not being known, because no one really understood what was necessary to document. They drew lines on pieces of paper and said, that's the map, go build it. And people went out and, the contractors had the nightmares and they built it, but they don't get paid to document. They get paid to do a red line, but if that red line goes into a box, It's no longer valid.
Talk to us about how that's done today, David. What's improved?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Today, again, most engineering firms are line drawers. They draw lines on pieces of paper because, first of all, to get an engineering locate is very difficult because locate services are very busy. So trying to get somebody to go out and locate for engineering purposes is very difficult and costly when you do get it done. So the guys are out there trying to say, well, this is where we believe things are at. They'll send out stakers and stuff of this nature, but most time you send out stakers, they're looking aerial, and because they don't know how to really look at the underground and say this is the route that's going, because that skill set was lost. Back there, whenever I was talking about how outside plant engineering became obsolete, the old guys who knew how to go out and look at a field and look at a road and sit and say, this is where it's at. I mean, I talk to guys who, today I sit and say, okay, they say, how do you figure out which side of the road you should be on? I'm going, which side is the water line on? Which side is the gas line on? I said, you want to try to avoid those because, in fact, during construction, those strikes are bad. So go on the opposite side of the road if you can. But if all the houses are on that side of the road, guess what? Boards on the roads are expensive. So build on that side. It's a lot of that things, doesn't transpose anymore. So, I mean, a lot of the companies now have these tool sets. They do auto design, and they think that's great. But most of those auto design tools don't know existing infrastructure. Even if you show a pole line, they don't really know that pole line. So they would do central road design, which unless you're building in the middle of the road, it's not relevant. Oh, by the way, the middle of the road is normally where the sewer's at, but so, that's
Hang
another
on, so
story.
they want to build in the ground? That's
Well, that's how the system looks at it. Is it just looks at road
wow.
lines as opposed to actually where infrastructure is, because they don't know how to recognize infrastructure. A lot of these new design programs, I'm not going to say any specific ones because I could, but that would not be very good. But most of them, I have not met one of them, and I've probably worked with all of them that's out there. That actually understands how to design against existing utility.
That's very interesting what you're saying, actually. So one thing I found is, utility strikes on telecom are I hate to say this, are very often. But the funny thing is, they're some of the most expensive strikes there are, because it's not only just the cost to repair, it's also the residual lawsuits which happen based upon the services going down, and it's really funny. Although the vendors cannot, or the people or the users on the actual telecom line cannot go after the phone company, because of course they've excluded that. The phone company goes after the person damaging the line for all the different additional costs. And we're talking one fiber line could be millions. And as well nowadays with fiber, the 911 services and everything else are now done by fiber. So if you cut off a fiber line, you could, in theory, be cutting off a robotic surgery, a 911 call center, all these different things, which before they had redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy with the copper lines. Now it's, they're just putting it through one or two fiber lines and that's it. What do you have any opinion on that, or just in terms of costs of why things have gotten so expensive in terms of correcting course per se and damages?
Yeah, no, I mean, that is the reason why finding good quality construction companies anymore are very difficult. Because like the cost of insurance for case of strikes and everything is very high. The liability ratio, the larger the company is, the more they build, the higher that cost comes into play. And but it gets back down to that very statement I made earlier about the engineering entities just drawing lines on pieces of paper, not knowing what's there, and not doing their own research to actually understand. Now, of course, every telephone company will tell you, oh, it costs too much money to have it field staked all the time, and things of nature. So these are just, 3-4 mile runs and things of this nature. Not that necessary. We will let the contractor figure it out. Well, you're putting something on a contractor that is their very job is to dig and bury and everything, and they use different technologies, plows and things of that nature, so they don't always know what's underground. Even if you did aerial, a perfect example of an aerial strike in underground is whenever you're sinking anchors. Most people don't think about going out and calling a locate when you just got to sink an anchor. But guess what? I've had more strikes because of people, especially telephone companies, even if they're grounding, rebuilding their grounds and stuff, having strikes because, in fact, we were very close to the pole line, everything. Voila. I actually had an incident where a guy was building a barn, and he was outside of the electrical utility, but he decided he needs some extra dirt. So he went into the electrical utility, started digging. Well, of course, my plant was there. Voila. Not only did he cut my copper, but he also cut my fiber. And that fiber put down 3 cities. Because instead of, we all talk about, we're going to build a ring. But the problem is, it's a collapse ring. It's all the same fiber sheath. It may be a different fiber, but it's in the same sheath. Because building is expensive. And building fiber rings in the rural marketplace, even more expensive and more difficult. So, the cost burden, but the thing is we just talked about the contractor, but the perception that the telephone company has by its end users when those type of things happen also is a problem, because they're going, we're paying you so much money and you can't even keep my services up. I mean, when we had that strike for that guy who was building a barn, it kept those 3 cities down for 12 hours.
Nowadays, it's absolutely incredible. It's not only telecommunication; it's everything. It's our TV, our streaming. Everything is through there. We are so centered and dependent on that one line working, and the resiliency of it is so strained. Look at what happened the last 2 years when people went to work from home. All of a sudden, the entire network was taxed to the maximum of bandwidth. It's absolutely incredible how we've always been an urban center focused telecom world where all the interconnectivity and the fast telecom's always in the urban centers, but now that a lot of people started working from home, you had that suburban sprawl and that rural lifestyle moniker, that pedigree, saying, okay, I can now do my work from home, and I still want to maintain the same connectivity I have from home. Can the telecom companies respond and actually get us to there? And the next question, the next thing that really comes to mind is, I have a friend of mine who has a cottage in rural Ontario, very, very, and he has a pole 150 meters from his house. The telecom company says, okay, for us to pull a line into your house, it'll cost X, Y, and Z. It was actually more economical for him to get to get internet services through that new Elon Musk Planet service, the low orbit satellites, versus pulling in a pole or pulling in a telecom line 150 meters. So really incredible. Do you have any opinions, or just that's the way it is?
Well, no, I mean, unfortunately, it is the way it is. But I'm definitely opinionated on a couple of things of this nature. I actually live in the rural marketplace. I have a 53-acre spread here that I enjoy my life here in Lead Hill, Arkansas, and everything. Now, right now, I'm on a wireless service because the telephone company can only give me 1.5 megabit. Even though they have fiber nearby, everything is just not on the list for building yet, and everything. So I'm on a wireless service that is adequate. I'll just put it that way. Everything, but most telephone companies have certain rule sets, and after X amount of feet, then the customer has to contribute to the cost and things of this nature. And some states have contributory programs and things of this nature. Some do not. So it all depends upon how much it's going to cost. Here in Arkansas, they actually have a state fund that pays, a certain, the telephone company is responsible for 2/10 of a mile for build, and then the customer wants it, they pay $250, and the government will pick up the rest of the cost. So that's good. Indiana, Tennessee don't have that, So those are some of the challenges that face on that front. But Arkansas is definitely more rural marketplace than Indiana or even Tennessee, especially from a low income aspect.
David,
so that's one of the challenges.
Take us back to the planning phase of putting fiber in the ground. What do you think companies and fiber owners should be doing differently? Like if we're saying that the software the software is a problem because it's automated or so on, but what else can be done? Like what can we do to avoid these problems?
Well, I mean, this is where there are tools that can be used. I mean, the best thing is field staking, but actually a qualified field staker. But if you don't have a qualified field staker, then you can use the technologies. GPR. As much as people sit there and say it's expensive, back to Ophir's mentioning, it's costly for a strike. So using GPR, which I actually have done in several different programs, both U.S. and overseas, and you have the ability there to find things. Now then, okay, like here in Arkansas, people sit and say, well, there's so much rock, you can't really see anything. Well, guess what? Most people don't build, they build to the rock, and then they will do a slice. That will show up on a GPR. The GPR of yesteryear versus today is significantly different, but you have to have skill set to read it. Plus, it's a lot of information. So I mean, you're talking about, megabytes to gigabytes worth of data to go through everything. Then where do you store it at? Things of this nature, and so there's a lot of that questions and everything. But GPR would definitely be a good tool set to use.
That is combined with EM, correct? That is combined with the EM investigation, though. The electromagnetic. Okay, good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, you always will want to, but again, getting locate companies to go out there and do engineering locates is very difficult.
Wasn't that the whole purpose of the SUE industry, though? To do go out?
The SUE industry, well, but it ended up being to where for construction more than for engineering. So there are two different criteria that they call. They call out for engineering locates, and that's up to the individual services offering, the 411, 811 service offerings, to decide whether or not they will or will not do an engineering locate. Then there's the construction locates, and that is a mandatory locate that the respective telephone companies have contributed toward, or utility companies have contributed to, and they pay a monthly service fee for that. No one wants to pay for the engineering locates because that gets expensive. $30 a locate for every quarter of a mile becomes expensive or quick light, especially when you talk about long haul builds. Major builds. 10, 20 miles.
Don't we use as-built at this stage? Like, because the preliminary stages, it's just difficult to send out teams and start to do staking.
Well, not really. I mean, because if you do it in a telephone pole line, you do send out stakers, and they do verify the pole line.
Yeah.
So it's not that difficult. I mean, you can sit there and say that it is time consuming and costly, but in reality, it will cost you less than a delay will cost you.
Absolutely.
And that's the key thing. Delays are significant. Now then, if there are good as-builts, that's great. But I'll caution you on as-builts. They're not GPS oriented. I mean, you drew a line down a road, and when that contractor was building something, he ran into an obstacle. He deviated, but you're not going to see that deviation on an as-built because he's not going to, unless he deviates significantly.
Yeah.
A red line will be, okay, if he moved it 2 feet over, why show that?
So that's really interesting because what you're saying is when you're saying staker, you're talking about a surveyor, correct? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
because there's different vernacular across North America, and okay, so you're getting your surveyor to go out and survey the line. It's really funny because it's so counterintuitive. You're sending a surveyor to get exactly what he can see, but what you can't see is where that the true problem is. What's below ground is that true problem, and it's so counterintuitive. Here, let's put a lot of money into what we can see, but you know what we can't see, out of sight, out of mind, doesn't matter. Let's let the construction guys deal with it. The construction guy gets it and goes, okay, I have to go from A to B, and here's how I'm going to do it. Trenchless, whatever my method is, and if I have to change anything, that's good. That's actually great for me. Change order. I'm going to charge the telephone company more money, and it's literally a cat chasing its tail right through and through. Instead of actually putting that money into engineering and saying, okay, let's understand what we're doing and start mitigating and start really understanding the risks and really design properly, you're just going to the cheapest model saying, okay, I have my engineering bucket, which is X. I have my construction bucket, which is Y. If I put money into my construction bucket, I'm actually seeing things and I see that here I'm doing things, so it looks good. But putting money into engineering doesn't look good. It doesn't look like it's a good line item. So I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and keep on going the way you are, the way we're doing it. Is that what you're saying, David?
Yeah, and unfortunately, one of the way the mindset is to offset that is, well, we're going to hold the contractor reliable for the breaks and the cuts and things of this nature. And instead of saying our engineering was substandard, it's just, hey, Mr. Contractor, it's your responsibility to locate the existing services.
Yeah.
Okay, so he calls the locate company. Locate company gets it. Now then, the locate company has a plus minus 48 inches on either side.
Mm.
So and they're not responsible for showing
Right.
depth. So if something's buried shallow, if something should have been buried 3 foot and your requirement is to bury something 2 foot, and so they say, okay, well, it's on this line, but it's 36 inches. Then they stop plowing and somebody put it at 12 inches. It's we don't understand. I mean, back in the early days, we did a lot of engineering. Engineering was a big deal in AT&T. I mean, there was in GT&E, they had some specifications that were just rock solid. But we've turned all those away back to that glut of build. We just build, and don't worry too much about what was there. And in result, we have a proliferation of information out there that's highly questionable. Back in the before GPS even became available, how much plant was put in the ground there was, well, this is the running line, okay, and the right of way says you're supposed to keep 5 foot from the back of right of way. Okay, wow, that's really great. How many times did that right of way line change? I mean, state of Arkansas, the actual in the country, the roads are recognized that as personal property up to the center of the crown. So I own half of my road out there.
Wow.
I mean, so yeah, try to negotiate those right of ways.
Very interesting.
What do you think the telecom companies should be doing different? Like how do we change this culture? Like what would incentivize them to invest more in engineering?
That one's a tough one because the
We're here to
government,
ask tough questions.
yeah, back down to that government involvement. The government has a formula. And if you show you're going to invest this much in construction, this much in engineering, and that much on engineering is greater than what their formula says you should have, they're not going to award you the money. So it really gets down to back to the fact that the funding sources do not recognize the values of certain things. And the worst thing about the engineering side of the house is that even when the as-builts are done, it's not accurate. So because the contractor isn't an engineering firm, They're doing red lines based upon what they place in the ground. There's no GPS tied to it, things of this nature, other than maybe a handhold or a pad or things of this nature, or a splice point. So and then most cable plant documentation system are not geo-rectified, so they are they are just geo-coded as opposed to GPS oriented. So you have inaccurate information. So the industry as a whole has to start recognizing that engineering is important, but you have to have true outside plant engineers to show that value. I mean, when I was with Ericsson and I did a project for them, I got them to make a significant investment in the engineering side of the house for an outside plant project, and that ultimately was a big cost savings because contractors knew what they was getting after a few minutes of experimentation when they was going, oh, I don't trust engineering anyway. Most contractors, they get a piece of paper and they look at the engineering, they say, okay, from point A, point B, okay, and then they put in and then until they go to red line it, they don't look at it again. But once they saw that it was accurate and everything, and they wasn't having hits and city stops and community stops, they started recognizing the value of the engineering. And engineering, by the way, goes beyond just drawing the lines on the paper and knowing what's there. It's also that working with the respective communities and the city planners or roads planners and things of that nature, because they can start your project down just as easily. And okay, yeah, as a contractor, you can charge standby time, but it's not helping the company ultimately, and then that degrades your marketing value by the government on giving you funds because like you failed to meet deadlines. So lots of different things that has to be done. So there's that the project management side of the house, the engineering side of the house, and then the final working with the contractors, and then maintaining it. And the maintenance side of the house is where things, even though how good of an engineering you had done, how good the contractor documented it, when you have a emergency repair, it all goes out the door.
So, do you have any good news from everything you said? Is there anything positive which we've taken, which we've had lessons learned over the years? With all your experience and everything else, have you seen anything actually being implemented right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been talking about a lot of the negatives, but I mean, from the 40 years, there's been a lot of great things happening. We're now starting to really address the needs of people, and we through the process of deregulation, the industry now realizes that they don't have to use you. Now whether you are a rural ILEC with a quote unquote monopoly, just to get the wireless carrier out there. So now all of a sudden the industry is recognizing that the end user has a lot of say in the matter. And if we don't recognize that, that's whenever we start losing money. That has become more and more. As a result of that, a lot of the rural elects have become actually more progressive than a lot of even CLECs or even the major carriers. In that you'll see that now there are a lot of pockets of fiber to the home being built by the rural elects without government subsidization or without government funding. So not the RDOF, not the Reconnect things, but actually out of their own capital budgets. So that's good. They are starting to recognize that. The community involvement, starting to work with communities to get certain, because it's tough enough you don't have a take rate, to build for it. So those all been positive things and everything. But the negatives as far as not having good engineering functionality and trying to offset liability is still yet there, but more awareness of customers and trying to be more proactive and as opposed to reactive to customers. I think that's the biggest change that I've seen and the best change. I'm
going to talk one thing right now. Within the states and within the engineering process, as you stated, there was a lag and there was a a period of time where a lot was not done. But right now, UESI and ASC, and they've really seen that all this lag of information has really been impacting all the works right through the nation, any infrastructure project. And they have two standards: the AC 38, which is the depiction of existing infrastructure, investigation of existing infrastructure for design purposes, exactly what we're talking about, the engineering locates. And they have the ASC 75, which is going to be released, which is the actual as-built standard or the as-constructed standard, which they are now implementing. And they're tying a lot of funding to actually maintaining and actually using those standards. So, for example, in Montana, on any right-of-way which you're working, you actually have to now return an as-built to a quality level as per the AC 75 or the soon-to-be released AC 75. Same thing in Canada. There's a municipality called York Region that is now issuing permits, and on the permits they're saying we need a as-built to this level, stating, with GPS survey, with total station, and giving the accuracies in order for them to actually issue that permit. What do you say to that in terms of universally saying, you want a permit, make sure you give us the right information back? Is that something that's feasible? Is that something that will work within the U.S. or within the telecoms, or is there going to be a lot of pushback?
It won't work in the U.S. in the telecom industry. In sewer, water line, those type of things, yes. Telecom, it won't. Again, it's a cost point, and when you say the quality of the as-built and things of this nature, well, first and foremost, until you strike something, you don't know whether or not the quality of the as-built was any good or not. You know, and then as far as the major locate companies, well, not everybody has to use them. That's the other aspect. You can self-locate. So a lot of rural elects will self-locate, and so they don't have to turn it in to those things. Most municipalities, small cities, water and sewage departments self-locate. So there's not that turn-in value. And again, it becomes the knowledge of the people who work there, which sounds pretty good. The fact that they don't know, but then they retire. I was working with a company that had a rural ILEC here recently, and their technicians have been around for 25 years. Well, by the time I was with them, 3 of them had retired, and there was only 1 with intrinsic knowledge left. All new hires. So in result, all that intrinsic knowledge was lost, and they had self-located for a long time, and their engineering was geocoded, not GPS coded. So that's a big difference, and everything. So yeah, I think it's a great move, and it'll be something that'll be good in larger municipalities. And I would say that until the states, as you said, Montana and things of this nature, but those are all tied to the DOT, DOT usage, right-of-way usage, then that'll be good. But there is, in the rural marketplace, there was a lot of private right-of-way use because it's easier. First and foremost, like my road out there, they grade it, and they're so close to my fence line, I have to keep putting my poles back up, because they keep knocking them over and everything. So, but all of the utility poles are on private right of way. I have 3 of them in my own land. So that's one of the challenges that would come with that, is that it's a great concept, but regulations don't always work.
Interesting. Very interesting.
David, two last questions before we wrap up. Number one, any tips for designers and engineers in the industry and what they can do better besides what we've already discussed? First question.
Okay. Yeah, first question. So tips, yes. Learn your industry. Know what you're building. Go to the field. Don't be afraid to go out there and act as though you are an inspector. Don't be afraid to get on a plow and plow. If you don't know how the construction techniques work, you're not going to be able to design for a construction technique.
I guess that goes for
So,
any industry.
Right.
Yeah. Second question, David. Who would you recommend that we should have as a guest on our podcast that we can learn from a bit?
well, hmm. There are a couple of people. I don't have their names off the top of my head. You caught me off guard on that one. But I can
So
send you a
we'll
note
get back to you
on a
on
couple of people. Okay,
that.
I'll send you a note on a couple of people I would just say would be good industry
Perfect.
knowledgeable.
Okay. So, David, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Lots of really, really cool insights on what's happening in the telecom industry, mainly about how we can do better as an industry and what engineers can do better and what the utility owners can do better. So there's lots to improve, and there's lots of opportunities when there's things that need to be improved. So that's it. Had a great time, and until next time.
Yep.
David,
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed the
Have a
conversation.
good
Or
day.
David, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I would like to sit down with you one of these days and really discuss what happened to all that copper in the ground. All
My pleasure. Anytime.
right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, guys.